Hello, my name is Sandy Adomaitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hi, I'm Sandy Adomaitis.
Hi, I'm Terry Sampson.
Terry, I'd like to start things differently today.
Okay. Are you going to frighten the listeners or?
No, it is scary October, but the world is a mess right now. And I've been sad. So I called you and I wanted to talk about maybe not recording. We went back and forth and you said the most important thing. You know, maybe the writers and our listeners out there need the show.
I'm amazing.
And do you have anything else to add?
I would say that my take is going to be the same as yours and the same as a lot of people sitting out there, looking at all the ramifications that the world is going through. And it just seems like my belief in human beings in general is the lowest I've ever had since I've been walking around here. I want to believe that people are good, and I'm not getting fed that.
Let's start the show.
I was thinking that there's a lot of talk about AI right now. And it was the first time that I ever connected up with the idea that there has been improvisation, which is not in a script, in movies and television for years and years and years. And I wanted to figure out when I became aware of that. And when I was a kid, I became a fan of the Marx Brothers, a big fan, especially Groucho, who was probably the first guy I recognized was, at least it looked like he was improvising funny things. Whenever you'd watch one of the movies or you'd see him in the 50s, he was host of game shows. It was very funny. And it seemed like a spontaneous humor.
Right. No. When you see clips of him on talk shows, especially when he's older, he really is quick.
Yes. Groucho seemed like a different kind of funny. So maybe that was my first year in high school that I became a big fan of Groucho Marx. And then shortly after that, Monty Python shows up. And then shortly after that was SNL. And all of a sudden I started to appreciate that there's this improvisation thing going on. And it was amazing to me. And I said, this plays a big role off script. Let me look into this. I knew there was a relationship from AI to something else that sort of was lingering in my brain. And they don't really seem related, but I thought it might be fun to talk about this. And that is that before there was AI, there was improvisation on probably every kind of production, entertainment vehicle that's ever been done. And I think some of the best parts of movies, it's not unusual that these have been improvised. In fact, I believe you might have a couple of examples of this that I sent you because I like them so much. Would you like to present those?
First one up. I'm walking here from Midnight Cowboy as Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight are walking down a street at a busy New York intersection. They attempt to cross when a real New York City taxi cab flies into frame, nearly hitting both actors. The taxi was not part of the film, but the reaction became a legendary response to a moment that was not planned. If you haven't seen the movie, you have seen this scene because it's in every compilation at the Oscars.
He slams his fist down on the hood. How about the next one?
I'm a zit. John Belushi approaches the famous food fight scene with plenty of ideas because the only thing in the script was that they would be in a food fight. The rest was all improvised by Belushi, including the now classic, "I'm a zit" line.
He stuffed his face with potatoes. He hit his cheeks and then emulated a zit.
You see potatoes. I see rice.
Yeah, I think it's potatoes, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I?
But there are rice balls, right?
There are rice balls. I'm not sure how the potatoes were served. I'm not sure how classy it was, but it's memorable. The next one.
The Circle Talk, The Breakfast Club. After filming The Breakfast Club in sequence, John Hughes decided to let his actors take what they knew about their characters and create their own dialogue. There was no direction given to the actors besides be honest about who their characters truly were in the film. That's really nice.
I was surprised about that one. I did not know that was improvised, but I do remember thinking it was authentic. I felt like something important was going on because it seemed more real at the time.
Let's see if we can remember what each of them talked about. I remember Emilio Estevez talking about bullying, and he was not happy that he did that.
He was the establishment in that circle, and they needed to have that guy. This will come up again, by the way, in this discussion. It's really important to have that kind of person.
Judd Nelson, he played the poor kid. He talked about his father putting a cigarette out on him, right?
Right. Molly Ringwald.
Molly Ringwald. I can only remember her line, "It's sushi, don't you know?"
She was a social plus kind of gal. Like Anthony Michael Hall was a nerd. He had his points. Everyone did. They defined themselves by a specific point and made everyone else around them think differently for a second. And one of my favorite scenes of all time, let's talk about that in the next one.
Hitting the Flowers. Harold Ramis loved Bill Murray's ability to create moments in all of his films simply by improvising on the spot. So when it came down to Caddyshack, Ramis allowed Murray to create comedic gold for this one scene, which was all improvised.
It was him fantasizing about being in like the U.S. Open. It might have been Masters. And he used the top of a flower bed, the flower tops, and pretend they were golf balls, and he would be hitting them into his fantasy of greatness. It was just great. I saw Caddyshack about 4 times because the guys I was living with in college at the time could not get enough of it. And in the end, that little speech is known verbatim by a whole bunch of people, can reenact that, even today.
The magic of movies.
Yes. The final one.
Chest waxing scene. The 40-year-old virgin. Much of the back and forth dialogue from the 40-year-old virgin was from countless takes of improvised moments. The scene where Steve Carell has his chest waxed turned out to be real, and his reaction was just as much. I had no idea.
Those are excellent examples. So let's talk about improv. Sandy, you are a well-seasoned improviser. Schooled at the Groundlings?
Yes, Groundlings, John Bates, Cynthia Sigeti, trained by the best.
Did you feel like improv affect you artistically in a positive way?
Yes. Wouldn't it be funny if I said no? First rule of improv, when something no. you say yes and add information. Because if you say no, that's the end of the conversation. End of scene. Improv is how I discovered that I was a writer. I wasn't one of those people who wanted to write my whole life. I wanted to be involved in comedy. I loved comedy. I wanted to be around funny people. And I had called the Groundlings, but since I didn't have any improv experience, they used to give those people who called over to Cynthia Sigeti. And Cynthia changed my life. She's an actress, but she was the improv teacher in Los Angeles. Her students, Pee Wee Herman, Phil Hartman, Conan O'Brien, Lisa Kudrow, the best writers behind the scenes and the best comedic actors on the screen and on television. Cynthia pulled me aside and said, "I think you're a better writer than an actress." And I'd never even had an acting lesson. I was a baby. I was so young. Well, the Groundlings is improv, and they teach you improv. I think it's lab level, and you have to start writing. You have to start writing for the characters that you're coming up with. And I'd never written before, and I could write for my own character. It didn't feel like writing to me. It wasn't difficult, and it was so much fun. I couldn't stand it. And I just loved it. And I loved being able to perform my own characters. It was great. So that is how I learned or got interested in writing. And I would recommend to all the writers out there, and I've said this, I'm like a broken record, take an improv class. I would say this just to people in general that are out there listening to us that are here for the true crime stories. Also take an improv class. It really does open you up. That simple rule of yes and. You're at a party and someone approaches you and says, "Did you try the dip?" If you just go, "No," it kind of is like, well, I'm not saying you have to lie. Yes, oh, I was planning to. It looks delicious. Just that positive way of entering conversations. That way also, it just helps you with shyness.
Well, in contrast, I was given improv lessons as a birthday gift. I didn't have to audition. I just had to show up. And I really wanted to learn about improv because I just loved it so as a viewer. What I found with my reaction to the Groundlings was, and improv in general, was intense fear at every second. I did not see that coming. I was so afraid that when I think back to it, I think that my sphincter muscle enlarged by tenfold by the end of this from being clutched in fear for hours on end. But my best moment was they would point at you randomly and they would say something and you had to respond to it. So this is my only victory at improv class. They will point at you and give you an instruction just out of nowhere, just quickly. They pointed at me and they said, "Give me an energy drink name." And I said, "Good damn morning."
That's great.
And I think that was my biggest moment. But remember, I was there for almost 8 days. So no, it was not comfortable, but you know, how many times in your life have you said, "I went through something that was not comfortable and I'm changed for the better from it"? So I go back to my influences in this area, and my favorite one are the Marx Brothers. And if you've not looked into the Marx Brothers, I have a really good idea for you. If you go to YouTube and look up a Broadway review called "I'll Say She Is" on Broadway in 1924, but they did film it entirely on film, but I think only segments are available. I think this will give you the basic idea of the Marx Brothers in a very short amount of time, 5 minutes, and you're going to get how these guys made movies, which were the following ways. The early ones were made from vaudeville shows presented in the 20s. And then they flipped them into movies. The Marx Brothers are Groucho, Chico, or Chico, but I believe Chico is the right way to say it, and Harpo. Now, their brother Zeppo played a straight man. He was in several films. And there was actually a brother named Gummo who was more of the business end of things. It was basically down to 3 guys, and that would be Groucho, Chico, and Harpo. Their mom was their manager. And at first they were singers and musicians. According to folklore, the mother had to go take care of her husband who was ill, and they left the boys on their own. And that's when the shenanigans began, apparently. So instead of singing and playing their instruments, they got funny on stage. And it never really returned back to just a musical act. So Chico was probably considered the everyman. Harpo is the wild card. By the time they were successful, he had stopped doing any dialogue on stage and would do everything in pantomime. Harpo never really spoke, played harp great, by the way, hence the name. And the final piece is the sarcastic, improvisational Groucho Marx. Has the wit thing down to a science. And he would come in and play off anything that was going on. It feels like he's improvising constantly. So that's the formula in which those three fellas, and Zeppo sometimes, who's just a setup guy, that's how their comedy clicked. And it went from the stage to film in 1929, 1930s when talkies came in. And they continued for almost exactly 20 years, and then they were done. My favorite part of the scripts would be the names that Groucho Marx would have. My favorites are Otis P. Driftwood, Rufus T. Firefly, fantastic. He played an attorney named Loophole, which I thought was nice.
Adorable.
And of course, the fabulous Quincy Adams Wagstaff. These just make me happy that somebody would bother to find something this ridiculous to call themselves. So my memories of the Marx Brothers was that I took them on as a freshman in high school. I discovered them then, way after it was over, of course. And I felt that Groucho was a sarcastic kindred spirit. And then shortly after that, Monty Python appears on PBS. And shortly after that, Saturday Night Live. And they all shared the comedic questioning of authority, sketch techniques, and improv techniques to create comedy. And it just seemed like the best time ever to be a fan of comedy.
Terry, before we go, we want to let the writers out there know we're going to recap. Drum roll, please. Take it away, Terry.
The Ghost and Mr. Chicken.
We can't wait. That's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, and thrive. Till we get to hang out again, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards. Executive producer, Kristin Overn. Producers, Terry Sampson and Sandy Adomaitis. Music by Ethan Stoller.